The room is suffocating. The air itself tastes of iron and decay, thick with the stench of wounds left to rot. Candles burn low, their smoke clinging to the damp curtains. Yet even their glow cannot soften the horror before you. Around the bed, women whisper prayers through clenched teeth, clutching rosaries as if the beads might shield them from what they see. Every sound is hushed, except the labored breath of the figure lying beneath sweat-stained linen. Her body is bound in cloth, the bandages dark and wet, seeping through with fluids that no perfume can disguise. Once she was regal, a daughter of Spain, a sovereign whose word bent nations. Now her crown lies untouched in a corner, its gold dulled by dust, while she writhes under the weight of her own flesh. Her skin, once painted with powders and oils, is stretched tight, breaking open in lesions that refuse to heal. And then you notice it, the motion, subtle at first, a ripple beneath the wrappings, a shiver that does not match the rhythm of her breathing. A servant dares peel back a strip of cloth. What spills out is not blood alone. It is movement, white, glistening, merciless movement. Maggots, alive, writhing, feeding. They twist in her wounds, chewing through skin that still clings to life. They do not wait for death, they create it. The women recoil, muffling screams, crossing themselves in terror. A doctor drops his gaze, unable to meet the sight he has been called to witness. His verdict trembles out. An infestation born of filth, of wounds untended, of water denied. The irony strikes like a curse. She had forbidden fountains, chained wells, decreed that water itself was suspect. She had believed that stillness was strength, that what flowed must be tamed or destroyed. And now, on this bed of damp sheets and whispered prayers, the absence of water has summoned its own army of executioners. This is how the Empress lies, once the most powerful woman in the Spanish Netherlands, now a spectacle of living decay. Not felled by assassins, not overthrown by rebellion, but undone by what she most despised. How could it come to this? How could a ruler, armored in titles and obedience, meet such an end, devoured alive by the very proof that nature cannot be commanded? To know, you must return to the beginning, to her childhood, her court, her laws, her fear of water itself. Only then will the truth reveal why power flowed from her grasp, and why the element she tried to forbid became her final judge. She was born into shadow and discipline, in a palace where silence carried as much weight as prayer. Isabel Clara Eugenia, daughter of Philip II of Spain, came into a world where power was measured not by kindness, but by obedience. From the first days of her life in Madrid, her existence was bound to the strict rhythms of the most Catholic court in Europe, a place where ritual suffocated wonder and austerity was mistaken for virtue. Her father, Philip II, ruled not only a vast empire but also the private lives of those within his walls. In his court, joy was a fleeting trespass, suspicion a daily guest. He carried with him a deep mistrust of water, seeing in bathing a habit tainted by foreignness, a practice of Moors best left behind. To him, and to the physicians who served his throne, water was not cleansing, it was dangerous. They believed it weakened the flesh, opened pores to unseen enemies of disease, and threatened the sanctity of the body. So Isabel grew in a world where perfumes replaced baths, where powders masked the truth of the skin, and where filth was concealed beneath silk. The court reeked of incense and musk, but beneath the finery lay a quiet rot. For a child, these lessons were not mere customs, they were commandments. She learned that purity meant control, that strength meant denial, and that to surrender to the flowing, untamed nature of water was to surrender to chaos itself. From her earliest years, she was trained not as a girl, but as a vessel of legacy. Tutors pressed Latin and scripture into her, confessors tested her resolve, and courtiers studied her for weakness. The girl who played in palace corridors also walked under the weight of her father's gaze. She was never to be ordinary, never to be soft. The world she inhabited demanded severity, demanded she embody the rigid, immovable will of Spain. And she embraced it. Where other children laughed, she learned restraint. Where others stumbled, she stood rigid, cold as marble. Obedience was not only expected of her, it became her armor. In a court built on suspicion, she discovered early that power came not through tenderness, but through the ability to suppress the self. This was the foundation of the woman she would become, an iron sovereign forged in a house where even water was feared. You must imagine the paradox. An empire stretching across oceans, built on conquest and gold. Yet within its heart, a princess was taught to fear the very element that sustained life. It was not ignorance alone, but a reflection of the age. 16th century medicine whispered of humors and vapors, of invisible forces that preyed upon those foolish enough to let water touch their skin. Physicians spoke with conviction. Water could kill more swiftly than a blade. And so Isabelle believed, because belief was demanded of her. By the time she reached womanhood, she was already shaped into an emblem of her father's world. Obedient yet severe, pious yet unyielding. Her face, painted in portraits, shows not the softness of youth, but the sharp clarity of resolve. She would carry her father's distrust of water like a sacred inheritance, a conviction that would one day rule not just her life, but the lives of thousands. And here lies the first seed of tragedy. A child raised to mistrust what flows, to despise what cannot be controlled. A lesson that would harden into policy, and finally into the cause of her own destruction. If you have never heard how superstition shaped royal health, how fear itself was crowned alongside kings and queens, subscribe to Echoes of Time, because these are the stories history books whisper about. In 1599, her path carried her northward, away from the rigid chambers of Madrid and into the turbulent heart of Europe. Isabel Clara Eugenia was given in marriage to Archduke Albert of Austria, and together they were crowned rulers of the Spanish Netherlands. It was a union forged not by affection alone, but by necessity, a binding of two dynasties to hold back the flood of rebellion that threatened to tear Spain's dominion apart. The Low Countries were a land in upheaval. The Dutch revolt smoldered across the provinces, a war not only of soldiers but of faith and survival. Protestant reformers carved out their defiance, while Catholic Spain sought to chain them once more to its will. Merchants whispered of liberty, nobles courted alliances with rebels, and cities lived beneath the shadow of sieges. Every day power shifted like quicksand. It was into this chaos that Isabelle stepped, bearing the weight of her father's stern legacy. From the start, she proved she was not content to play the role of consort. She ruled beside Albert, not behind him. Her hand signed decrees, her voice carried in council chambers, and in her mind, she believed she had been placed here to preserve not just Spain's authority, but the eternal order of God himself. Yet the way she chose to impose control was as strange as it was ruthless. She turned her father's mistrust of water into law. Edicts spread across the provinces. Fountains in public squares were shuttered, their flow silenced beneath iron locks. Access to wells was restricted, guarded by soldiers as though the very act of drinking could become an act of rebellion. Bathing, once a simple relief from heat or toil, was declared a weakness of spirit, a moral indulgence that left the body exposed to sickness. To be seen washed too often was to be seen as corrupt, effeminate, vulnerable. In her court, perfumes and powders replaced water, the skin hidden beneath layers of scent and fabric, the truth of the body smothered beneath appearances. Her laws were not merely practical, they were symbolic. To Isabelle, water represented something far more dangerous than disease. Water flowed where it willed, obeyed no master, dissolved barriers, and carved its own course. It was rebellion made liquid, liberty that could not be chained. And so, in her mind, to forbid water was to forbid disorder itself, to show her subjects that she could command even the untamable. But to the people of the Netherlands, who lived in a land defined by rivers, canals, and the ceaseless battle against the sea, her decrees were nothing short of tyranny. Water was their lifeblood, the essence of their survival. To have it withheld was to be reminded that their bodies, their thirst, their very lives, belonged not to themselves, but to her will. Each dry fountain was a message carved into stone. All that flows must be stopped. All that resists must be silenced. This was Isabelle's vision of order, an empire of stillness, where even nature itself was forced to obey. Yet within the silence she imposed, unrest only deepened. For no decree could still the rivers. No command could erase the tides of change sweeping through Europe. Would you have survived under such laws? Let me know in the comments. And if you wouldn't, then at least subscribe so you never miss the full story. Whispers spread faster than proclamations, carried not on parchment but on the breath of the people. In the streets of Brussels, in the taverns of Antwerp, in the fields of Flanders, they began to murmur that to control water was to control life itself. Each sealed fountain, each guarded well, was not just a symbol of order, it was a reminder that even thirst now belonged to the crown. Mothers filled their jugs under the watch of soldiers. Children played in dust where once cool streams had flowed. Every drop carried the taste of obedience. Merchants were the first to raise their complaints openly. They lived by water, moved their goods along canals and rivers, and relied on the flow that tied one city to the next. Restricting water meant restricting trade, and trade was the lifeblood of the Low Countries. To them, Isabelle's decrees were not only heavy-handed, they were ruinous. They gathered in guild halls and whispered of a sovereign blind to the very needs of her subjects. A ruler who sought to dam not only rivers but the prosperity of her own people. In the churches, debate took on a sharper edge. Priests argued that to deny water, the element blessed by baptism, bordered on sacrilege. Water was not merely a necessity, it was holy. To restrict it was to flirt with heresy, to place human command above divine creation. Some pulpits thundered in defiance, others fell silent in fear, but everywhere the question lingered. Had the Empress overstepped not only the rights of man, but the law of God? Then came the drought. The skies above Flanders closed themselves, and the earth below cracked. Crops withered, rivers thinned, wells grew shallow, and the people, already burdened by war and tax, now looked upon their sealed fountains and their rationed water with fury and dread. Many saw it as judgment, divine punishment for a ruler who dared to place chains on what heaven had set free. Farmers muttered that God himself had withdrawn the rain to expose the Empress's folly. Among the poor, a darker tale spread. She had cursed the wells, poisoned them with her pride, and now the land itself was rotting under her command. These were the first seeds of legend. The woman who once walked in procession crowned with jewels was now called in whispers the Empress who cursed the wells. A figure no longer only feared for her power, but despised for her defiance of nature itself. It was in these years that myth began to entwine with fact, twisting her reign into a tale of hubris and punishment that no decree could silence. And while the people turned to rumor and resentment, inside the palace, the Empress herself began to wither. The severity that once made her formidable now consumed her body. Her skin broke into rashes, her strength faltered, and beneath the perfumes and powders, the first signs of something far darker began to emerge. If you believe rulers can escape the judgment of nature, remember her story, and subscribe to Echoes of Time so you never miss the truths that lie hidden beneath history's silence. It began with a rash. At first, small red patches hidden beneath the brocade sleeves of her gowns, brushed off as an irritation of fabric or the consequence of long nights in chambers heavy with smoke and incense. But the marks spread. They grew darker, angrier, erupting into sores that refused to heal. The palace whispered of exhaustion, of stress from governance. But behind closed doors the truth was more unsettling. Her ladies worked tirelessly to conceal it. They dabbed her wounds with powders of lead and mercury, the very cosmetics prized by courts across Europe. These substances promised beauty but carried poison in every touch. What was meant to hide decay only deepened it. The sores blistered, cracked, and seeped beneath the weight of perfume and ointments. The sweet scent of roses and musk could not disguise the underlying rot. When physicians dared suggest cleansing with water, she recoiled. To Isabelle, water was not cure, it was corruption. She believed it opened the body to weakness, to disease, to invasion. Water is corruption, she is said to have muttered, refusing the basins prepared for her. She commanded that only powders and incense touch her flesh. The linens of her bed were changed often, but always dry, always kept from the flow she so despised. In the stillness of her chambers, as attendants tended her by candlelight, the sores grew worse. The skin split open, layers of flesh swelling and hardening. Some claimed they saw movement beneath the wounds, though none dared to speak it aloud. Servants left the room pale and trembling, convinced that divine punishment had taken root in their sovereign. Beyond the palace walls, rumor traveled like wildfire. They said the Empress had been cursed, that she was being consumed from within by the very rebellion she tried to smother. She is punished, people whispered in taverns. Punished for chaining the fountains, punished for cursing the wells. Some swore she was being eaten alive by worms before death had even claimed her. The legend of the Empress of Worms had begun to grow, even as she still clung to life. And within her bedchamber, every new wound made it harder to deny that the stories outside were not mere invention, but a reflection of what those closest to her could already see with their own eyes. If you're still watching, it means you love uncovering the dark side of history. Echoes of Time brings you more stories the world tried to bury. Join us. The chamber had grown into a place of dread. Even the most loyal attendants entered reluctantly, clutching rosaries as if beads of prayer could shield their eyes from what they were about to see. The curtains were drawn tight, and the room reeked of incense burned endlessly to smother the stench. But incense could not erase what lived beneath the bandages. On one sweltering afternoon, the Empress stirred in her bed, fever breaking into a tremor of violent coughs. Her ladies rushed forward, pressing cloths to her lips, but what emerged was not only phlegm. A pale, wriggling thing fell onto the sheets, twisting in the candlelight. A scream broke through the chamber. One of the women dropped to her knees, gagging as the truth revealed itself. Summoned by panic, Albert himself entered, his face paling as the bandages were pulled away. What lay beneath was beyond description. Flesh torn open into gaping wounds, the edges swollen and blackened, and within them movement. Dozens of small white larvae writhing in the living body of the sovereign, feeding on her still beating flesh. The attendants recoiled, some fleeing the room altogether. Those who remained whispered prayers of exorcism, believing that hell itself had broken through her skin. Albert called for physicians, and among those who arrived was a man whose name would later be remembered. Jan Baptist van Helmont, a Flemish physician and early chemist, respected for his daring ideas and clinical eye. He bent over her body as silence gripped the chamber. His voice, when it came, was steady, though his expression betrayed horror. The diagnosis was spoken in Latin first, then in words the court could not mistake: myiasis, an infestation by fly larvae. The wounds had become nests for living creatures. The attendants gasped, some crossing themselves in terror. Van Helmont continued, explaining that it was no curse, no sorcery, but the natural result of wounds left unwashed, of skin left to rot beneath the very perfumes meant to preserve her dignity. The words struck like judgment. The woman who had outlawed fountains, who had forbidden her people to drink freely, who believed water was corruption, was now being devoured by what water alone could have prevented. Irony hung in the chamber like smoke. Her fear of water, her relentless defiance of it, had invited her downfall. She had chained the fountains of her people, and now she herself lay chained to a bed, consumed by creatures born of thirst and decay. Do you think this was justice or tragedy? Comment below, and if you want more forgotten truths like this, subscribe. Albert did not hesitate. The horror he had witnessed left no room for indulgence, no space for her stubborn creed. He summoned Van Helmont again and commanded that treatment begin at once. Bowls of water were carried into the chamber, steaming with crushed herbs meant to soothe and cleanse. The scent of rosemary and sage mingled with the bitter reek of decay, a desperate attempt to drive back both disease and despair. When Isabelle saw it, her fury erupted. With what strength remained in her fevered body, she lashed out at the attendants. Her voice cracked yet thundered through the suffocating air. I will not be bathed. Water is corruption. It is betrayal. I forbid it. Her hands, frail and trembling, clawed at the sheets as though clinging to her defiance could preserve her dignity. But her resistance was hollow against the weight of inevitability. Albert stepped forward, a man torn between duty as a husband and necessity as a ruler. His voice, once gentle in her presence, now carried the unyielding command of authority. This is no longer choice, Isabelle. This is survival. With those words, he gave the order. The attendants moved quickly, holding her as Van Helmont peeled back the rotting cloth. The basin was lifted, and for the first time in years, water touched her flesh. At once the chamber filled with a sound that no prayer could soften, the soft hiss of water meeting wounds alive with infestation. The larvae writhed, loosening, falling away, carried into the basin with every rinse. Some attendants turned their faces, unable to watch, while others wept silently as they washed the woman who had once forbidden the act itself. And in that moment, the greatest irony of her reign unfolded. The very element she had declared corruption now cleansed her. The substance she feared more than rebellion was the only force capable of giving her relief. As the water coursed over her body, her screams gave way to sobs, her protests to silence. For the first time, she felt what she had denied her people. Water not as enemy, but as mercy. It was a symbolic reversal so cruel it seemed scripted by fate itself. The sovereign who chained fountains was being restored, if only briefly, by the flow she had tried to forbid. Yet even as the maggots fell away, everyone in the chamber understood that this relief was not salvation. It was only the beginning of her final surrender. The cleansing brought a fleeting calm, but it could not turn back the tide. Within days, Isabelle's body surrendered. The sores deepened, fever consumed her, and her voice, once sharp enough to command generals and silence priests, faded into a rasp no louder than the flutter of a dying candle. One morning, as dawn crept pale and uncertain across the city, the attendants found her still at last. The linens were soaked, her skin ravaged, her breath gone. The woman who had once sought to bind even the flow of water had been claimed by the one thing she could never master, the slow, merciless decay of her own flesh. The court reeled. Whispers of worms and divine judgment passed through corridors that once echoed with proclamations of power. Officials hurried to draft dignified notices, but outside the palace walls, the truth was already spoken in taverns and markets. The people gave her a name that would cling longer than any title of nobility: the Empress of Worms. It was not a name of reverence, but of warning, etched into memory with equal measures of horror and contempt. Albert, left to rule alone, understood that the very element she had outlawed would become the foundation of his legacy. He ordered the canals repaired and expanded, fountains reopened, access to water restored to the people. What she had chained, he unbound. And in doing so, he made a silent statement, a rejection of her policies, a tribute to her downfall, and perhaps a confession that he, too, had learned the lesson her body had carved into history. From then on, water flowed again through the Spanish Netherlands, not merely as necessity but as remembrance. Each fountain became a reminder of the empress who tried to silence them, and of the worms that proved no ruler, no matter how iron their will, could command the laws of nature. In the years that followed, her death ceased to belong to the court and passed instead into the mouths of the people. In the taverns of Ghent and Bruges, drinkers swore that Isabelle had not merely forbidden water, but poisoned the very wells of her subjects, seeking to keep them weak and dependent. The story twisted, reshaped by ale and anger, until she was no longer only a sovereign but a villainess who turned life itself into a weapon. From the pulpits came another version. Priests thundered that her fate was God's judgment, a punishment for arrogance, a divine reminder that no monarch could presume to control what the Creator had set free. To them, the worms were not merely creatures of decay but instruments of heaven's wrath, sent to consume her body as a warning to every ruler who might follow her path. Painters seized upon the legend with fervor. Canvases depicted her not in the dignity of state portraits but as a grotesque icon of Gothic horror. A woman draped in silks, her body riddled with sores, pale larvae twisting across her skin like a plague of living pearls. These images were bought, copied, displayed in shadowed halls where nobles whispered over them as if gazing upon a cautionary saint of corruption. And yet, beneath the lurid legend, modern scholars searching centuries later uncovered the quieter truth. They pointed to the toxic powders of mercury that ate into her skin, to the perfumes that sealed infection beneath layers of oil, to the refusal of water in an age when hygiene was scarce and superstition commanded obedience. Her death, they concluded, was not the hand of God but the hand of ignorance. Not divine wrath, but a tragedy of medicine, custom, and pride. Still, the myth clung tighter than the facts. For in Brussels, every fountain seemed to whisper her story. Children grew up hearing of the empress who cursed the wells. Travelers tossed coins into basins carved long after her death, and the name Empress of Worms remained etched deeper than marble inscriptions or official records. If this mix of myth and fact intrigues you, subscribe to Echoes of Time. And if you won't, tell us why in the comments. I want to read your defiance as much as your support. She tried to command what cannot be commanded. She chained fountains as if she could bind the veins of the earth, silenced wells as if thirst itself would bow before her crown. Yet when her body faltered, when the sores opened and the flesh gave way, she discovered that no decree, no army, no lineage could save her from the truth of what she had denied. In the end, it was not rebels who broke her reign, nor assassins who pierced her walls. It was the very laws of nature she had refused to acknowledge. The worms that consumed her were not just creatures of decay. They were symbols of inevitability. Water and worms together became her final teachers, showing that power may silence voices and crush rebellions, but it cannot halt what flows by its own design. She tried to stop what flows by nature. In the end, water and worms taught her, and us, that power can command armies but never the laws of nature. The story fades, but the fountain remains. Water spilling over stone, clear and endless, defying every attempt to be contained. It whispers still, carrying her memory in every drop, reminding us that no crown can rule forever against the current.